moving from a sedentary to a physically active societal way of life. This is Up on Our Feet.
Welcome to Up on Our Feet. The scene makes you laugh good-naturedly. Great apes, gorillas, suspended a foot or two in the air by holding on to a vine and rapidly spinning themselves around and around until they playfully fall to the ground. I remember often doing the same thing as a young child, especially with playmates, not in the air, of course, but spinning ourselves dizzy and silly and then falling to the ground. We loved it. It made us laugh then too. And we get the same feeling on playground roundabouts or carousels where several of us would be on a 10 feet in diameter circular platform about 8 inches off the ground, horizontal stabilizing bars about waist high to hold on to, and then parents or other kids would push the roundabout or carousel around and around. That spinning made us laugh with utter delight as well. So the question is, why do the apes spin themselves voluntarily? And why, as kids, did we love the spinning, the self-spinning and the roundabout spinning rides? What's going on here? Well, someone who's conducting research on this phenomenon is Professor Adriano Lomira of the Department of Psychology at the University of Warwick in Coventry, England, which is about a little less than a 2-hour drive northwest of London. Professor Lomira is a primatologist turned evolutionary psychologist and is a principal investigator at the university's Ape Tank, whose theme is Know Thy Origins. The Ape Tank studies great apes as living replicas of our own extinct ancestors, their communication, cognition, and culture, and how all this relates to humans. Professor Lomira also roller skates and practices the dance-like Afro-Brazilian martial art of capoeira. Professor Lomira, it's nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your interest.
You bet. Okay, well, let's start off. There are a number of related topics we'll explore here, but to begin, how did you first come across this phenomenon of the ape spinning, and what
yes.
motivated you to investigate it?
Well, actually, the whole interest was triggered by a video that went viral from a gorilla in Zoo, if I'm not mistaken, where you see this silverback just having the best time of his life in a circular pool that probably was provided to him as enrichment, and that just completely triggered him, and then someone edited and put She's a Maniac as a soundtrack. So that was kind of a remarkable behavior just per se. What really caught my attention was the fact that I've observed great apes for thousands of hours in the wild. I've lived in Borneo, in Sumatra, following and living alongside wild orangutans for many years. And so when I saw this, it was remarkably distinct from anything that I had seen other great apes in the wild doing. And as you mentioned, so similar to things that we ourselves have all experienced at some point as a play behavior in our lives. So that really kind of caught my attention. And I started to talk with a colleague, and we were both so kind of triggered by the conspicuousness of the behavior that we just started looking, and we kept on discovering more and more videos online. So we ended up kind of using YouTube as a depository, as a public science database to kind of really try to get a decent coverage of these behaviors across all great apes. And eventually we observed that all great apes, our closest living relatives, are doing this. So I mean, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos. So that was remarkable because, as you alluded, they are our closest living relatives. And so they provide the best living proxy that we can observe that transport us back to who may have been our last common ancestor. And so they really provide us a way of trying to put together the puzzle of who were our ancestors, because they went on evolving and became ourselves. So those ancestors don't exist anymore, but we got to be able to find clues and reconstruct their biology, their behavior, to kind of try to understand also our current state, because we got to know where we come from to understand our current situation and preferences and tendencies and constraints.
Okay, so I read where you compared the spinning speeds of the apes and found that they can spin while holding on to a vine or rope as fast as human professional dancers or circus artists, and even the mystic whirling dervishes. This is a very high level of spinning coordination and efficiency. So the question becomes, why are the apes doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. So our results showed that the longer they spinned, the higher the likelihood that they would just fall on the ground dizzy, as one would expect. And we know by experience that the behavior has no direct function. So our intuition was they are also doing this for the head rush. They want the physiological high that comes with this. But of course, we had to, because we cannot do invasive research with great apes, we had to find kind of a way of circumventing this. So that's exactly how we did it. We kind of thought, okay, let's look at the speeds that we know humans can only achieve after extensive training, and see what's the level at which the great apes are reaching. And great apes in a recreational context are, as you mentioned, spinning as human professionals, circus performers, and spinning as fast as Sufi dervishes, who, exactly as you mentioned, use spinning as a mystical experience. So our hypothesis was actually kind of to confirm the intuitive idea that great apes are tapping into this experience. They are self-motivated to change their mood, to regulate their awakened consciousness, try to disrupt their state of awareness, their situational awareness, and kind of basically for the same reasons we seek a thrill when we're bored. It seems that that's exactly the same drive that is eliciting these behaviors in great apes.
Okay, then related to this, in a news release regarding the research, you referred to the human trait of, as you just did, of seeking altered states of consciousness, almost being something that's universal. And given that we have evolved from the apes, from an evolutionary perspective, how is this related to the spinning of the apes? Do we in some way have a need to, or an inclination to pursue altered states of consciousness? And this is what we saw in the apes, and we see that with the dervishes. Is that what's possibly going on here?
I believe so. So we know that throughout history and across cultures, every community has found ways of disrupting their state of awareness, right? Being it through substance use or dance rituals or trance-like behaviors or stereotypies. And so it kind of really calls to the attention of, wait a minute, if this is universal in our species and our closest living relatives are all doing it, it's almost certain that our ancestors were also doing this and could do it. So these are behaviors that can be achieved without any external source, right? So and that's important, because when trying to reconstruct where and how our ancestors lived, the further back we move into the past, the more difficult it becomes to reconstruct the exact environment, being it ecologically or socially. So, for example, there's always the possibility that we lived in a place where there were grapes, but the local culture didn't know how to do wine, for example. And so we are not dismissing the probability that they may have been able to do so. As researchers trying to reconstruct that past, the confidence level that we can assign to those contexts is very low. However, as soon as you have a context that you can conclusively say, no matter what, they could have done this, you just have to spin, then we really need to start taking more seriously what may be the consequences in terms of mental health, in terms of what has been the function of these states in our evolutionary history and into the origins of the human minds. And so as you mentioned, we think of carousels and roller coasters as purely as entertainment, but if we really look into the past, these were methods that particular communities, when the fair came, this was an important event, and people used this individually and socially as an opportunity to engage in a way that was accepted into these behaviors. And of course, we kind of typically assign this to folklore and popular culture, so we don't assign it a great deal of importance. On the other hand, more recently, we only think of these of altered states when associated with substance use or abuse, and so the topic has been a bit of a taboo, that it's not sober enough to deserve a proper assessment and a proper study. So I think we should really embrace more recent popular history, ethnography, and then bring all the evidence that great apes can offer us into our deep past. And I think all of them are pointing to this idea that millions of years ago, our ancestors already had mechanisms to cope with mood, to cope with boredom, to kind of self-stimulate out of a situation where you just had to be jolted. You had to self-energize yourself again. So it's really interesting to start kind of thinking, okay, if this was happening millions of years ago, then surely this factored in how the human mind kept on evolving. So I think it kind of opens up a complete whole landscape of knowledge that we are yet to fully appreciate about modern human behavior.
Okay, so this is really interesting. All around the world, and I know it's a big problem here in the United States, people use drugs to induce these altered states of consciousness. And yes, there are studies done with LSD and things like this, but there's so much drug abuse in the Western world. In looking at the apes, where they probably didn't have, any access to any type of stimulant that would induce these altered states, so they do the spinning or these other kinds of activities. In a sense, then, are people using illicit drugs to induce these altered states with the apes spinning is, excuse me, is this showing us in some context that maybe the altered state of consciousness is something that is positive for us, and that we're going about it in a negative way with the drugs when we could be spinning, or the athletic high that athletes get or that musicians get, or things like that? Is that somehow involved here?
Absolutely. So I think there are two aspects here important to point out. Is when we indeed seek substances, they are hijacking natural circuitry in our biology, right? And so those systems were already in place and could already be disrupted by natural means like spinning. That's just also a hack. but it's a hack that you can control of. So if it's too much for you, you just stop spinning, right? And so you can go kind of it kind of it gives you that access to altered states with a certain control, right? You can just kind of regulate it to the point that you can get sick with it and throw up and vomit. So I think, and the second aspect is we've kind of relegated that need from normal society, right? We kind of that idea of the polished citizen. That's all great, but we may be ignoring simple biological, deeply wired needs and drives and mechanisms that kind of need to be fulfilled. And if they are not, they'll come out downstream by other means, right? So exactly as you mentioned, I think here, so for example, with great apes, we saw most of the behaviors coming from captivity. We saw some in the wild, but mostly from captivity. So if you think that, the extent of thrill and sensory stimulation that a captive great ape receives as compared to its cousin in the wild, it's a gigantic chasm, right? So we also then can think of ourselves, and we are often refer to ourselves as the self-domesticated ape. So we also have that kind of captivity syndrome. And so we kind of need to kind of perhaps embrace more these mechanisms that allow us to, in a natural way, compensate for the lack of stimulation that, living in a jungle or in a savanna or in the forest would have offered us. And so exactly as you mean, that extra stimulation, we can seek it through sports, we can seek it through music. These are all I guess it's calling back our physicality. It kind of calling us like we are embodied, our minds are embodied. We gotta kind of we are, the mind and the body are just two sides of the same coin. We cannot have a mind living in vacuum inside a body. And so of course this link in mental health is known, but I think that the idea that altered states play a role there as well is very important. For example, when you put a child to have a sport class or join a sport team, you want the child to become confident and explore the range of possibilities, external possibilities. I think that we gotta have an education where we also incorporate education about the inner range of experiences, the inner landscapes, being with emotions or just simple self-awareness, balance, coordination. That's, I think, what altered states kind of probably evolutionary. That was probably the fitness, the premium in terms of advantages that these individuals would have compared to other individuals that, they would be at a disadvantage of someone who kind of probably had a better understanding of its emotions, its range, what it is to be attentive or not, to be physically present, situationally aware or not. And so it raises all sorts of really interesting questions.
Is this what's going on with the kids on the playground roundabouts and the swing sets? This is why they're doing this. It's really they're looking to experience their evolutionary genetic makeup, their biology, and they're not getting it in certain domesticated situations. So, and this is what makes them laugh so much. Is that what you're saying here?
Yeah, isn't it curious that you look at the playground and more than about 80% of the devices you'll see are all devices that challenge your sense of balance and coordination. So probably the exception are the climbing racks that are strictly physical, but the swings, the slide, the roundabouts, the merry-go-rounds, the spinner balls, the seesaws, they're all meant to disrupt your center of gravity, to kind of give you this sense of rush. It's really interesting that parents actually voluntarily without consent bring their kids there, and that's and they know that it's important, and they know the kids are going to love it. And so I think intuitively we understand the importance of these behaviors, and it wouldn't be, it's not surprising in that sense if we start factoring in that these drives are very old. It's not surprising to see that kids enjoy it, that kids will independently find these behaviors by themselves. We kind of, right, everyone has had this experience, but it's not a game that you learn from other kids. It's something that at some point maybe you saw another kid doing, but it's not something that it's kind of passed down through generations. Just something that will pop up regularly, independently across communities and neighborhoods and countries. And so yes, it is indeed, we got to recognize how deeply seated these behaviors are, how adults intuitively understand that this is important and fun for kids, and they provide access to it. And so it surely deserves a little bit more of attention. And I think from my part, as a primatologist and evolutionary psychologist, I would love to kind of provide a similar setup to great apes, for example, and see why, kind of understand better the why of their drive towards these behaviors, because this could really kind of we probably know it already, but seeing great apes doing it will give us, oh yes, okay, our intuition is telling us that this is the reason why these behaviors are important. We have these hypotheses and suspicions. It would just be wonderful to start really testing this.
Okay, so you were just talking about balance and coordination, and how the spinning and the swing sets involve this. Have you ever thought about what it would mean for either the apes or the children if they didn't spin themselves, or were prevented or hindered from doing so?
I think it's as any animal behavior in that way. If you constrain it, it will steam off some other ways. So then the individual will start developing behavioral tics or stereotypies. It's very interesting in another aspect. It's very interesting, for example, autist children will seek often spinning behaviors as a means of comfort. So, for example, an autistic children, if when set in a swing, they will often not swing, but they will torque the ropes and then kind of enjoy the rotation back. And so these behaviors kind of provide them this confidence that they can control their stimulation. They are in control. These are kids that kind of are highly sensitive to any impression in their environment. And so it's really interesting how these behaviors, again, are independently discovered by these individuals to seek comfort and seek control, kind of a sense of autonomy. And so there is, again, another piece of evidence of how important these behaviors are in terms of just almost like physiological sovereignty, right? Kind of like, this is my body, I understand it. If I want, I can phase out the world, literally. I can blur everything around me and kind of go inwards, kind of gain back that kind of earthing effect. And so yes, if we suspect that these are biological advantageous behaviors, blocking them or ignoring them, as we as a society are still doing, with the exception of playgrounds, that kind of it's an almost like an involuntary access to those behaviors, then yes, then we're going to have escape behaviors. We're going to have the redirection towards other things that probably don't fulfill the needs so well, but it's kind of the second best, and sometimes the second best is not really good at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. In this context, I'm not sure if you may know about this. I don't know. This is our first time we've spoken, but we also know from the field of sensory integration that if children don't engage in spinning activities in their early years, or they're not rocked by their parents when they're infants, that this can lead to learning disorders regarding the processing of language communication. So here too might the desire of the children to spin themselves be an important factor in the development of language communication in general, and how this eventually impacts their learning in school.
That's right. Yeah. So if you think about it, an altered state, it's just a system state where your brain, the patterns of firing in your brain are just significantly different than your normal awakened state. And so you kind of understand then the consequences that you may get when the brain is not finding out more patterns that are possible of stimulation and firing and integration between different areas and cross area waves, and so waves of firing of neurons. And so absolutely, so for example, as you mentioned, kind of it's almost as if the rocking and the spinning and these behaviors, almost like it's the backup, our physiological backup, to find those alternate states of firing in our brain and nervous systems all over, because the brain is integrated with the rest of the nervous system in our body. So for example, in many cases, orphans that are sensorily deprived, they will develop stimming and rocking, again back into kind of almost like a default mode of like I gotta keep, the body seeks this state where there is some stimulation, kind of almost like an evasion of the normal state of affairs, so to speak, when it comes to the firing within our nervous system. And so absolutely, I think the quality of the brain stimulation will almost inevitably reflect on the quality of the behaviors that brain will be able to perform. So it's definitely a recurring theme in our biology and cultures.
Okay. Related to this, have you come across anything in your research indicating that the spinning, the rocking, and the swinging might be or has something to do with human emotions?
So I believe so, right? So these behaviors offer a thrill. And so this could be very well, I mean, I'm speculating here, but when we do things that offer us pleasure, it's just a way that nature has found over millions of years to kind of make us go and seek that behavior. And so it definitely speaks to the importance of the behaviors. Sorry, remind me of your question again.
Right. So is there a connection here between the spinning or rocking or swinging and how it impacts our emotions regarding our behavior and
Right, exactly.
depression or anxiety or anything like this?
Yeah, I think those are difficult to tease apart, right? So our emotions go tied in with our physiological health. So if you just come out of a workout, it's tough, but you just inherently feel good about it. And just like any other experience, you have a good meal, you feel good about it, you have a good social exchange and interaction, you feel good about it. And so the again, it kind of goes back to the quality of the stimulation and all the firing that goes on in our bodies and all the feedback loops that go between our neurology and physiology. All those things are intertwined, and again kind of brings us back to the idea that they are embodied. So emotions are just kind of almost like a physiological input, just kind of a signal that the body gives to the nervous system, saying like, this is good for us, we're enjoying this, which, when it comes to natural behaviors, it's wonderful, because you will seek those behaviors again and reap the benefits. And so definitely, and I think again, kind of, we're going through a little bit of a mental health crisis, and maybe it's because we've kind of been ignoring that we really need to experience these ranges in experience and emotions. We kind of need to learn how to kind of find back the mechanisms that allow us, in a rather quick way and healthy way, to kind of pull us back and give us a bit of a thrill, kind of jumble up again what's going on in our brains, kind of find new patterns. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I just had this break. It was super fun. Let's go back to kind of business. So I think kind of just integrating this will just help us in our emotional lives, our cognitive lives, our intellectual lives, and perhaps even spiritual lives, because we shouldn't also disregard the fact that many communities, as you mentioned earlier, have found these behaviors to just experience the supernatural, and again, it's something that science still has to figure out and learn how to deal with. But we probably should start kind of, instead of dismissing it, just be curious and excited about a whole new realm of knowledge.
Okay. So, and given that the spinning, the rocking, the swinging, these are all physical experiences, it's almost, just like we know people need to be more physically active regarding their weight and things like this. It's almost as if this is calling out to us, the spinning and the swinging and rocking, saying this is another message from our genetic evolutionary makeup. We need to be more physically active in our current society. Yes?
Absolutely, absolutely. And somehow we kind of forget how fun it is, forget to be goofy, forget to roll down a hill when we, grow up, thinking that it's not proper anymore. We should probably embrace our inner child and inner ape.
I like that. Embrace our inner ape. That's pretty good. Okay, final question. Over the course of your entire professional career, and with all the studies and projects you've done regarding primatology and evolutionary psychology, in the big picture of things, what's the big message, the big takeaway, the major conclusion you've come to?
I think embrace our sense of curiosity, especially towards the natural world. We are so yet ignorant about what is happening in the natural world. And I think great apes, I've been studying great apes for 20 years after living many years alongside wild orangutans in the swamps and low mountain rainforests. And it's just the sheer surprise that you receive when seeing things that you just couldn't possibly conceive they could do it. So I like to say that reality is stranger than theory, because we theorize things about what they can and cannot do, simply based on the few bits of information that come our way, but we never really take the effort of really going and see. So that has been my effort in kind of really making a proper description and cataloging of their behavior, because simply those are still oftentimes these behaviors, they are not preserved in the fossil record. So we won't ever be able to find out about ancient spinning in our lineage from an archaeological dig. We got to see these behaviors in living organisms that provide kind of a realistic, valid surrogate of who we may have been in the past. And so these behaviors just continuously chip away on the pedestal that we've put ourselves as like the pinnacle of life on Earth. I think we gotta embrace again our evolutionary roots and see that we're just one of the many tipping points that evolutionary history could have taken. And I think that will kind of probably put us in better contact with nature and hopefully start respecting nature a little bit more. If we are so special, then we really need to take seriously our role as kind of guardians of this ecosphere as well. So kind of taking fully responsibility of how special we think we are.
All right, well said. Professor Adriano Lomira of the University of Warwick in Coventry, England, thanks for being with us on Up on Our Feet.
Thank you so much.